So 2 Kings chapter 4, as I said in our study of 2 Kings, our first few chapters, not only is this following the line of kings, but something that's happened as well as studying the kings of Israel. We've seen the prophets that correlate with those kings. And so now we've seen Elijah pass off the scene, and now we see Elisha is on the scene. And we'll jump right in here. We'll get some context. We'll read this first story that's told to us in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1. It says, "A certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, saying, 'Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. And the creditor is coming to take my 2 sons to be his slaves.' So Elisha said to her, 'What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in your house?' And she said, 'Your maidservant has nothing in the house but a jar of oil.'" This is so important. "And then he said, 'Well, go and borrow vessels from everywhere, from all your neighbors, empty vessels. Do not gather just a few. And when you've come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons, and then pour into all those vessels and set aside the full ones.' So she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured it out. Now it came to pass when the vessels were full that she said to her son, 'Bring me another vessel.' And he said to her, 'There are not any more vessels.' So the oil ceased. And then she came and told the man of God, and he said, 'Go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons will live on the rest.'" So what an incredible story. Really, there's so much for us to take in there. I think time would fail us to study the whole chapter if we focused just here alone. But there is a consistent principle throughout this chapter that shows itself up that I don't want to miss in its totality. So we won't do that and just focus here. But let's just dwell here for a moment. First of all, in verse 1, let's set the scene and understand who we're talking about here. This is a woman whose husband has decided to go into the school of ministry under the prophets. It says here, he's one of the sons of the prophets. He's become a mentor to the tutor of Elisha. And this woman says, "He was one of your servants. One of your students have died. And we have lost everything to the point now where the debtors are coming." So you can imagine, her and her husband had that talk. And they said, "Hey, we're gonna live simple. We're gonna give up all these things in life. And we're gonna pursue God." And in going to Bible college or seminary, whatever you want to call it, as they're pursuing serving God and committing more of their lives to Him and sacrificing in profound ways, which most people, if we're honest, will not do, right? So they're doing this as a family, and boom, he dies. Suddenly, tragically. So what does she do? She goes to Elisha and she's like, "Here's my story, man. This guy, we've given everything to be following you guys, to do this, to serve God. And now my husband's dead. And if that weren't bad enough," and she's wrestling with all that emotion and drama that goes with the death of her husband, the sons that she's left with are going to be collected to pay the debts that they now owe as a family. And that's the way it went. It's like, Discover Bill. It wasn't like they just kind of like did a deal with you and took less money. They would take your kids and you'd work the debt off through your children or your husband, but he's gone. So this is just an absolutely devastating, terrible, horrifying moment for this woman. And she goes to Elisha. She says, "Here's my story, man." She's upset, rightfully so. And so he says, "Well, what can I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in your house?" Now, this is such an awesome principle for us to dwell on tonight. Because so often we think we don't have enough to do anything, right? If we're honest. In fact, the old saying in missions is, most people do nothing because they can't do everything. It's one of those things like, well, I can't solve world hunger, so I'm not going to be involved at all. And so for a lot of us, if we can't solve the whole problem, we want nothing to do with it. But what we're ultimately saying is like, I've got to have a major impact. I have to have a lot to offer. And so often, what's so funny is in our mental economy, not God's, but in our mental economy, we think that we have to have so much of a thing or be able to do such a thing. Take it like sharing your faith with people. Well, I don't know much about the Bible. I haven't been a Christian very long. I don't have much to share. Well, what do you have? What do you have? Well, you have a testimony. And you don't got to be very smart, super educated to tell people your story. And here's one of the things I found. You can't argue with a genuine testimony. You can argue theology with people until you're dead and they'll never change. But what they can't disagree with you over is your changed life. Tell them to explain that to somebody. Why do I stop doing drugs? Why do I stop doing all the things I used to do to serve God? You tell me. Because in my mind it don't make sense, so it obviously wouldn't make sense in your mind. You don't have to have a lot to offer. You don't need to know the Bible front to back to share your story. So it's like, what do you have? This is a principle that's throughout the Bible. It's such a beautiful one. I'll come back to this maybe another time later before we close, but the feeding of the 5,000, the famous story. The disciples come to the Lord and they're like, hey, these people are hungry. You've been preaching for like ever, you won't stop. So like these guys got to eat. We got to give them a break, And so he says, well, why don't you feed them? Well, first of all, we just told you they're hungry. So what kind of people say we're hungry? We got food right here. No, they're hungry because they don't have food. He says, well, why don't you feed them? And we don't have anything. What do you have? So they go and figure out what exactly do we have? So they went in the crowd, and to their credit, I mean, it's not like they all like, well, we put our stuff together and we actually had a couple, baskets and this and that. No. They're like legitimately, no one had anything except for a little boy, which I always give street cred to that mom, right? That mom's like, hold on, Charlie, you get back here. You're taking your lunch with you. Something. He's like, oh, okay. And he brings a little brown bag. And they're like, hey kid, give us your food, And you're like, here you go. They're like, oh man, they're like rummaging through. They're like, there's like 5 little biscuits and 2 sardines in here. There's nothing. This is stupid. Well, and there's got to be at least probably doubting Thomas, right? He's probably like, yeah, let's go show that to the Lord. Let's show him all the food we have. And he says, all right, well, give it to me. Get everyone seated. Let's do this. And he starts breaking. You remember, as he breaks, it just keeps multiplying, and they feed thousands of people with this food. But the same principle. What do you have? I don't have much. Well, what do you have? I don't have nothing. What do you have? I have a jar of oil. I don't have anything. Well, what do you have? I have a jar of oil. Now, in all fairness, no one's sitting around saying, well, this is going to solve your problem. You have a single jar of oil. We can do something with this. That's kind of the point, though. Let me say it like this. We so often worry because we have less resource, thinking that that's what limits God, right? Oh no, we're almost out. We don't have enough money. There's not enough. Fill in the blank. And we think that that's what's going to cause God to be limited. It's not true, though, is it? It's kind of the opposite. Like, as we're thinking, oh no, we're losing it. We don't have a lot of stuff left. God's like, awesome. Keep letting that dwindle down. You ever find that God loves to get you right to the edge and then a little more? And then a little more? I used to, the old saying, I used to say, oh, I'm hanging on by the edge of my fingertips. Now I hang on by my crusty, broken fingernails as they're bending, and then they start to let go, and then that's when God catches you. He doesn't just put you to the edge, he pushes you over the edge. I'm falling! And all of us construction workers know the 2-inch heart attack, right? When you step off an 1.5 inch plank and you feel like you've fallen to your death. Whew, I'm alive. It's just 1.5 inches, I guess. God does that all the time. He loves to do that. He loves to bring us right past the point where he can't do anything, or we can't do anything, and we think he can't do anything. And it would be seriously upsetting if I had to report to you tonight that everything depends on our resource. I would be depressed. I don't even know if I could be a pastor, quite frankly. If I had to stand up here and tell you, well, folks, it all depends on you and I's resource and what we can offer God, I probably would have quit ministry a long time ago, quite frankly. But the awesome story is I don't have to report that tonight. It's opposite. It's like where you think that you don't have enough and you're running low on resources, like that's the time to celebrate. Woohoo! It's time for God to show up. Time for God to do something, right? It's awesome. What do you have? Well, just a jar of oil. And this is what is great. He says, well, okay then. You go ahead and you bring that jar of oil. Now, let me remind you of something before we move on. I don't want to miss this because of how awesome God is. The word in the Old Testament, that God created the heavens and the earth. The concept is an ex nihilo creation. You know what that means? Does someone know what that means, ex nihilo? Made everything out of nothing. So when we're like, my limited resources, that's still more than nothing. Because literally, even if we had nothing, God can do a lot with nothing. You and I are pretty awesome as far as creation goes. Like what He's made in humanity, the fact that when we get cut, our body heals itself, He's kind of come up with these things out of nothing. So when we're like, oh, my limited resource, God's like, I created everything from no resource. Isn't that an awesome thought? Like God created, like, oh no, our stockpile is, He's like, I don't need a stockpile. I can literally make everything out of nothing. Awesome, 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 awesome. So then it's like, well, what are you going to do with that jar of oil when you put it in that perspective? What's going to happen here? Well, He says, here's what you do. You go to all your neighbors, which if you think about how crazy this is, all your neighbors in a small community know your husband's died, your son's about to be taken by the debtor, and you're asking to borrow stuff from me. No thanks. Like, good luck on your new journey in life. I don't want to let you borrow my stuff. You're never going to bring it back. Are you going to bring it back? And yeah, we're going to bring it back. What's really cool is in hindsight, you realize when she brings it back, that's probably how she did her sale. Hey, I know I borrowed this. I have it full of oil. You want to buy the oil with it? They're like, yeah, sure. How'd you do that? It's just a long story. Just you want to buy the oil or not, you know? But she has to go, and her sons have to go all these houses, knock on the door, have that embarrassing conversation. So it really, in knowing that all of these are going to be full of that oil, is one of the amazing things that, like, when do you stop? When do you stop asking for vessels? I think, well, once you've knocked on every neighbor's door 3 times, after they've given you everything, and you've gone back a second time, and then a third time, and they've given you everything they're willing to give you, that's about as much as you can get. But she gets all these jars. Now, how awesome, and the wording is very specific. It's like a little jar. It's a little tiny jar. Not much at all to deal with. It's like as they're dumping this out into one empty vessel after another, it's like, wow, this really didn't feel like 4,000 gallons in here. It just felt like a little tiny lamp of oil kind of thing. Like, this is unbelievable. It just keeps filling up and filling up and filling up. And this is one of those things that remind us of the many things of how God works. And notice too, when it stopped, it was on man's side of the equation, not God's side of the equation, right? When they stopped having vessels to bring is when God stopped pouring into them supernaturally. God's resources never run out. Think about it. Our resources do when we're limited, and when man's resources stop, that's when God stopped. It's an interesting concept. It's an incredible balance, a thing to figure out. God's sovereignty and man's responsibility. I think it's one that's something to be respected and considered. But I can give you 2 great quotes, one from Charles Spurgeon, one from Alexander Maclaren. Charles Spurgeon said, "If she borrowed few vessels, she would have but little oil. If she borrowed many vessels, they should all be filled, and she should have much oil. She was herself to measure out what she would have. And I believe that you and I, in the matter of spiritual blessings from God, have more to do with the measurement of our mercies than we think. We make our blessings little because our prayers are little." You know, I still remember reading in his devotional, Charles Spurgeon, something along the lines of him saying, you know, to a great extent, I believe that we have exactly what we expect from the Lord. We have exactly what we expect. So it's like the Christian's like, I don't believe in miracles today. Guess what? You don't ever see miracles, right? I don't believe in miracles. Don't ever expect to see one. But isn't it interesting that Christians that believe in God for like great and big things, they see God do great and big things? Isn't it a weird thing? Doesn't that challenge you and I at all, like a little bit? Like how much oil do you want? You remember the previous chapter? The water was gonna come in the holes that they dug. How many holes are you gonna dig? Well, I'll dig a half a hole, see if it fills up or not. Well, you gotta kind of commit. You're gonna dig or not? You're gonna do this or not? Another way to put it, Alexander Maclaren said, God keeps giving himself as long as we bring that into which he can pour himself. And when we stop bringing, he stops giving. So how much of yourself, how much of myself do we offer to God? That is about how much we're going to see God work in, right? How much do we allow God to work in and through our lives? If it's only on Sundays for an hour and a half, that's what God will do. He'll fill that part of your life for an hour and a half. It'll feel pretty good. It'll get you to like Monday afternoon. But if like every day that you wake up, you're like, Lord, I'm totally willing to do whatever you lead me to do. If I have a tight schedule that I can't deviate from because I'm an employee, then Lord, inside of those confines, you lead and guide me in every step of the journey. Help me to be sensitive. Amazing. As long as we keep bringing, he keeps filling. That's the awesome principle. So, desperate situation, husband's dead. He's not back from the grave, but the solution's been made. Now they can pay their debts and move on with their life. So we pick up in verse 8 from there. Now it happened one day that Elisha went to Shunem, where there was a notable woman. Now this is interesting. Maybe you have an old King James that says great woman, and that is true. That is the great definition. A great woman. And I just point this out because it's the only time in the Bible it tells us that a woman was great specifically. There's other titles, flattering titles for women. Only this once is it used of a woman. It says she was a great woman. So it tells us something very unique about her. Well, we get some inclination as to why. You just read on. She was a great woman, and she persuaded him to eat some food. And so it was, as often as he passed by, he would turn in there to eat some food. And she said to her husband, look now, I know that this is a holy man of God who passes by us regularly. Please, let us make a small upper room on the wall, and let us put a bed in there for him, and a table, a chair, a lampstand. So it will be, whenever he comes to us, he can turn in there. And it happened one day that he came there, and he turned into the upper room and lay down there. And then he said to Gehazi, his servant, call the Shunammite woman. And when he called her, she stood before him. Now, I just want to talk about this situation, this woman, and the prophet for just a moment. Now, I was recently convicted about something. I don't want to always bring my story and perspective in on the Bible. I'd like to let the Bible speak for itself as much as possible. But there is a particular story I'll share with you tonight as I think about this, and I was considering and meditating on this. And if I ever do share a lot, it's only because I want to be real and connect with you guys. You know what I mean? I'm like, hey, I'm a real person too, and in my normal life, here's how God showed up. Just like you can probably relate to that sort of thing. And so this is one of those situations where this woman saw him, and she's a notable woman. She's a woman of wealth and means. By virtue of the fact, she could say to her husband after they've had a few dinners with him, she's like, hey, he's definitely a godly man. Why don't we build an addition on our house for him? What husband's like, oh yeah, sounds like a great idea. It's like, that sounds super sketch. What are you talking about? Like, I got so much going on right now. I can't be building an addition for a vagabond. You know, that's kind of weird. But what's interesting about it is she just keeps it simple, and I think that's a wonderful thing. Just a table, a chair, a lampstand, like a desk, like an office, like a mini office with a bed. But it's obviously enough room for Gehazi, the servant, to stay there as well. So it's got some space. But I do love that there's simplicity there. Notice she's not like, now make sure it has an iPod, an iPad, so you can really study the sermons. Like, I think sometimes we don't need all those things. Just simple. The minister didn't need a lot. Just a table, a chair, a little place to get away, a little privacy, a little breathing spot. So as far as my personal story, my wife and I had the privilege, awesome privilege. So as many of you probably know at this point, I've said over and over again that my pastor is Aaron Dudley. He's my father and my pastor for all practical sense, okay? There was a season when we moved to Machias. There's a couple amazing stories that, I filed away, and I don't know when to share them exactly, but there's one when we weren't married yet, but we had been traveling up to Machias because we knew as soon as we were married, we were going to live in Machias, so our hearts were already there. So we wanted to be a part of that church plant as soon as we could, knowing that Aaron was pretty much by himself up there working in Machias, like where he doesn't know anybody. So we would go up and visit him. So one time, I remember Bree and I went in to visit him in his house that he bought with it used to be a gun shop across the way that we turned into the church. And we went in, and he was like falling asleep, sitting up against the cabinets, and he had been cutting like dust and debris and hardybacker board and sawdust. It was like, and he had like fallen asleep in such a way that he had obviously been so active, like Tasmanian devil, that when he had fallen asleep, the dust had like settled on him. So when he woke up, we startled him because he didn't expect to see anybody. He was like, whoo, and like dust went everywhere. It was awesome. I was like, this is like something you see in a movie. This is crazy, man. And he's like, oh, guys, I got to study. I got to get ready for church tonight. I'm like, yeah. We're here to help. What can we do? He's like, I need fresh underwear and a T-shirt right now. I was like, okay. You want some undies and a T-shirt? We'll go get you some undies and a T-shirt, I guess. We went over to the Family Dollar. I'm going to assume what size he might be, and hopefully it works. And that's it. It was the coolest thing to be able to just go and be a part of a church plant. And to go back there and visit from time to time and see what God has done over the years is so awesome to think and be so privileged to have part of that in our story. But another part of that story was we got our first sort of rental setup really in the heart of Machias, Maine. So as Aaron was new to the area and beat-bopping around, running a business and meeting people, where we lived was like an awesome stop point, if that makes any sense. We're like in his path all the time. And so he found it frequent where he would just pull in unannounced, and he'd be like, hey guys, can I catch a quick nap on your couch? Like, that's kind of rude. No, we didn't say that. We were like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So he would just nap on our couch, and we'd be like, okay, 15, 20 minutes sometimes. Boom, he'd be awake. We might feed him. He might ask for some food, and that was it. Like, we didn't like pour out our hearts and tell him everything we had going on and what we're worried about. Just, that was it. Feed him. Boom. He'd be like it was like a pit stop at a NASCAR. You know what I mean? Boom, boom. It was gone. And that went on for so many months. And Bree and I still think back and think we love that season, that he could feel comfortable to do that. Like, we didn't like, Pastor, we're there if you need us. Like, we didn't do it. Like, we didn't do that. He didn't do that. He's like, hey, I really need a plate. He just showed up. And when he showed up, he was like, here's what I need. We're like, take what you need. Let's go. And it was an awesome season, wonderful season. All I can share that with you is to say that this Shunammite woman found a natural, her house became that spot where he went by. It just made sense. Like, he's always going by. He's never fully nourished with food. Let's have him in for dinner. Like a stray cat. Like, let's feed him and see what happens. Right? Stray pastor, right? They bring in the stray pastor. And Elisha comes in and they have dinner with him, and she's like, no, this guy is a legit man of God. And so her mind goes to, let's up this and make a space for him to chill, have his own space, and make his own access to it, that he can just come and go whenever he needs to. It's his own little spot here in our house. What an awesome lady. That's why I said she's a great woman. She's just a cool lady, great woman. And so all that set up, and this has gone on for I don't know how much time. It doesn't really tell us, but this has gone on enough time. They built the addition. He's staying there, the whole thing. He finally says, well, let's call the lady down here. Let's talk to her for a minute. And so through the mediator of Gehazi, his servant, he said to him, say now to her, look, you have been concerned for us with all this care. What can I do for you? Do you want me to speak on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army? And she answered, I dwell among my own people. She's like, I'm all set. I don't really need much. I've got everything I need right here in my own people. So in verse 14, so he said, what then is to be done for her? This is a great question he's asking himself. And Gehazi answered, actually, I can only hear a nerd say, actually. I had a friend, that's why. I had a nerdy friend in school, and he loves actually, Greg. Actually, guys, it's mathematical. So go, actually, just shut up. You know what I mean? Anyway, sorry. He just popped back in my head. I heard actually, Greg. So anyway, actually, she has no son, and her husband is old. So he said, well, call her. And when he had called her, she stood in the doorway. And then he said, about this time next year, you shall embrace a son. And she said, no, my lord, man of God, don't lie to your maidservant. But the woman conceived and bore a son when the appointed time had come, of which Elijah had told her. So there's just so many great things even there to consider. First of all, check this out. She continues to do wonderful things for him. So he says, what can we do for her? You guys ready? This is so important for every one of us to get a hold of this. What can we do for her? You know, it's important, friends, that we remember this. Our friendship should never be like mathematical equations or like a book of accounting. You know, like, well, he did this for me, I'm going to do that for them. I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting this. At a certain point, when anyone has done something over and over kindly to you, you should think to yourself, what can I do for them? Right? I could give you so many examples. I'm trying to think of a way to keep it distant from us, but just enough so we can catch a hold of it. I just think about church sometimes. You know what I mean? Sometimes people just come to church and they suck whatever they can out of the tube. You know what I mean? They're like, we just want this and that. We love this program, and they take. And then they complain about the stuff they're taking, by the way. Well, we don't, what about this? And they just take. And they never think to say, well, what can we do? How can we serve? They just don't. They don't. I don't mean that in any harsh way. It's the fact of the reality. It really shocks me how many people do that with church in mind. Like, I'm thinking the church is the bride of Christ. We want to care for her, love her, tend to her. But sometimes people just come and, what can I get? What can I get? Get. But in our own friendships, though, think of it. Whatever it is, and I've used this analogy before, this is a safe enough one. If you have a friend that's always buying you coffee, just you know. When you go out, they're going to buy you a coffee. You know what I'm saying? They're just generous. That's what I would call them. Don't confuse them for rich, because rich and generous are two different things. In fact, rich people are usually stingy. That's what I found. That's my own personal thing, but that's how they got rich. Amen. So rich and generous are two different things. But generous says, as much as I can, it's a $2, $3, $8 cup of coffee nowadays, right? Actually, now I think about it, $300 cup of coffee anyway. I just figured I'll buy that for you. Now, here's my thing. Anytime I've said this, within a short period of time, someone will come to me afterward and say, man, I was so convicted the next day, I finally bought my friend a cup of coffee. So if I can set you free tonight and do that, then do that, right? Sometimes it's the boss man. Oh, the boss man always brings us pizza on Fridays and donuts and coffee. Have you ever thought to do that for him? Well, no, he's the boss man. He makes all the money. Maybe do it for him once, right? Why is it all we got to get? What am I going to get? Mine, me, mine. When is he going to do it again for me? When are they going to do it again? What about, what can we do for her? Isn't that a good prophet? Right? He's just like what can we do for her? And then she's like, ultimate awesome answer, right? It's like the answer when they're like, sir, you today have proven yourself to be a hero. And only a real hero says, oh, not me, right? I'm no hero. I'm just your everyday Joe. Now he is a hero. But if he's like, I know, like, that guy's a loser. He ain't no hero. Heroes don't know that they're heroes, What do you need? She's like, nothing. I built you an addition on my house. I don't need anything. But here's an awesome principle to remember. I want to say this emphatically, but I'll be careful. Everyone needs something, but I'm careful to say that. I'm not careful to say this. Everyone wants something. I do believe personally everyone needs something, but they're not always, I don't even know if some people can articulate what they actually need. But everyone wants something, right? What can we do for her? What can we do for her? What can we do for her? She said nothing. She's nothing. Gehazi, and there's a reason why, as we see in a few chapters, why he's mindful of intimate details. We'll talk about that later. He says, well, she doesn't have a son. She married an older man. They're not going to have kids. I think that's heavy on her heart. So Bing nails it when he says, you're going to have a kid. She's like, don't trick me. Don't play games with my heart like that. Don't mess with me, man. I can't handle that. And sure enough, at the appointed time, as the Lord told Elisha, she has a kid. So awesome setup, right? That's the ultimate. Thanks for all the cups of coffee. You can now have a kid. It's like, I think you've paid her back. More than fair. So in verse 18, the child grew, and now it happened one day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And in verse 19, he said to his father, my head, my head. So he said to his servant, which every father would do this, I don't know if it's good or bad, but carry him to his mother. Take him to his mom, right? I don't know what to do with this kid. His head hurts. I only work the kid. Verse 20. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees until noon and then died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, shut the door upon him, and went out. And then she called to her husband and said, please send me one of the young men and one of the donkeys that I may run to the man of God and come back. And he said, like, why are you going to him today? It ain't church. Well, he said the new moon or Sabbath. But you get he's like, hey, it ain't church. Why are we talking to preacher man? She's like, it's okay. Just let me go. Verse 24. Then she saddled the donkey and said to her servant, drive and go forward and do not slacken the pace for me unless I tell you. And so she departed and went to the man of God at Mount Carmel. And so it was when the man of God saw her afar off that he said to his servant Gehazi, look, that's the Shunammite woman. Please, verse 26, run now to meet her and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered to Gehazi, she says, it's well, it's okay, everything's good. Verse 27, and then she came to the man of God at the hill. She caught him by the feet. But Gehazi came near to push her away. But the man of God said, hey, let her alone. Her soul is in deep distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me, and he has not told me. There's times where Elisha will say that. It's almost shocking, like, wow, the Lord didn't give me a heads up on this. And I get it. I've learned this as being a pastor. It's just a calling, but I do know that a shepherd, by the way, the biblical term is a bishop, which means overseer. Think about it. God's called leaders, a prophet, pastor, to oversee the flock of God. What does that mean? He's seeing not just what's going on here in the food pen, but far beyond the borders. He's looking around the horizon, looking for other grass spots, looking for water, looking for shelter, looking for wolves, looking for all sort of thing, right? And so he says, man, wow, the Lord didn't show that to me. You know, sometimes people are busybody in church, right? Like they want to find the news to break it, like a news anchor or something. They want to break the news to people. What's really interesting as a pastor, I guess it'd be a great position for a busybody. I'll tell you that because people come to you with stuff, right? And like, you just find out a lot of stuff. God reveals a lot of things to an overseer. Doesn't that make sense, right? Like here, you're the overseer. You're supposed to see everything. Here's the information. So when he sees her coming, he's like, oh man, that's weird. The Lord didn't put her on my radar at all today. That's interesting. It's just an interesting perspective because we're going to see more of his internal battle as a man of God in a moment. I think it's precious to see. But let's start with that he's like, wow, she's not on the radar right now. What is going on? So just go ask her if everything's cool with her husband, her kid, that kind of stuff. When she sees Gehazi, she said, everything's good, all is well. Now, something we want to take note of in verse 21. She brought him upstairs and laid him on the prophet's bed, right? Which, it's been wisely stated, she is not preparing him for burial, which would happen instantly. Within hours, you'd try to bury someone because of the heat of the desert. She's not preparing him for burial. She's preparing him for a miracle, right? She's preparing him for something more than burial. So her faith is already there, but she still tore up at the emotion of it all. And it's kind of easy to read this. It would be something totally different if this happened to one of our kids or our grandkids, right? It would be like showstopper, shut everything down, get in the car and drive as fast as you can, right? That's what she just did. She just lived all that. She already blew off her husband and said everything's good. And we don't know if she's saying it is well because in her heart it is well. She knows God's going to take care of it. Or she's like, I'm not even going to bother your meathead, right? Do you know what I mean? Because if I told you, you'd be like, well, wait a minute, right? You'd try to haggle with me or something. I don't know where she's coming from, but hey, listen, I can make justification for her in this. If the dad is like, hey, what are you doing? The preacher man, it's not even Sunday. Like, oh man, everything's good, Charlie. Big Charles Sr., right? We had little Charlie. Big Charlie Sr., everything's good. I just need a donkey and I got to rip as fast as humanly possible. He's like, what's going on? He's just like, whatever. Then he comes to Gehazi, and then she comes to Gehazi, and he's like, hey, is everything good with you and your husband? He's like, yeah, everything's cool. I just need to talk to the prophet. Blows right by him. Now, it's one of those things, man. Sometimes the people just want to see the prophet, the big guy, whatever you want to call him, the formal guy. But I do believe there are such things as a person like in Gehazi's role that can be so instrumental in his own right that people don't even need to get to Elisha. You know what I mean? Like the Gehazi is so able to conduct himself in such a way that Elisha isn't necessarily needed. That's not the case here. But let me just paint a little picture for you real quick. I am going to tell you a little ahead of time, if you don't already know, Gehazi in the future chapters is going to be a snake. He's not always a snake, at least in the scripture. He's there, he's trying to do nice things, he's being helpful to Elisha. But in the end, he is going to be a con man, a total liar con man, okay? Within just a few chapters. So just, if you haven't read ahead or you don't know, just buckle up. It's going to be nuts. But here's the thing. This is a great woman of God. So here's what I'm saying to you. I think that she has enough discernment to know this guy is a weasel, right? I don't want to talk to Gehazi about what I'm going through, right? Because by the time I'd explain it to him, it'd just be a nightmare, so I'm not going to do that. And just to the point that Gehazi is ultimately going to fall. Now, here's what do we do? What do we do with people, ministers, pastors, Gehazis that fall from grace, right? Like they live like a long life. They do a lot of good things. I think for some of us, the Ravi Zacharias is one of those like crazy ultimate scenarios, like decades of like awesome, powerful, evangelistic, apologetic ministry. Boom, he dies, and then loads of scandal comes out, and you're like, whoa, that's sketchy. Well, I believe that the gifts and calling of God are without repentance, and that God's put something inside of men, whether they're being obedient or not, that's inside of them. But I think one of the wisest words to consider when we think about someone like a Ravi Zacharias or a Gehazi is something that Professor John Lennox's mentor said to him. He said, the chief end of the shepherd, the chief test of the shepherd is how he ends up. The chief test of the shepherd is how he ends up. It's not what he does throughout his whole life. It's how he ends the whole thing. And Gehazi does not end well. And I'm saying all that to say that I believe this woman was onto something. In fact, another thing, a Charles Spurgeon thing, was Charles Spurgeon was really awesome in his lectures to his students, the way he spoke to those guys, those pastors in training. And he said, I don't take much stock in what the congregation thinks as a whole, because they're not always right. But, he says, I've acknowledged that there is one thing that is unanimous that the congregation seems to always nail down. You know what it is? It's the calling of a pastor. The church, for some reason, we can argue about paint choices and style and service times and all the stuff that people bicker about. But like the unanimous thing is when a man steps up behind the pulpit, the church somehow seems to know or not know, by and large. They're like, yep, he may be a bonehead, but he's called. There's something within the church that throughout the church age that we've said, yeah, that guy's called by God. He's actually called to be a minister. Then there's guys like Gehazi that are fakes, phonies, weirdos. And I think she just knows all of that. She knows that so well. So in verse 28, she said, did I ask a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? Then he said to Gehazi, get yourself ready, take my staff in your hand, be on your way, and if you meet anyone, do not greet him. And if anyone greets you, do not answer him, but lay my staff on the face of that child. And so in verse 30, the mother of the child said, as the Lord lives and your soul lives, I will not leave you. So he arose and followed her. So she's moving. Now Gehazi went on ahead of them and laid the staff on the face of the child, but there was neither voice nor hearing. Therefore he went back to meet him and told him, saying, the child is not awakened. And then verse 32, Elisha came into the house. There was the child laying dead on his bed. And he went in, therefore, shut the door behind the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. Can I just point out a couple things? Like, because we're moving through quickly, but just imagine this home, in a general sense, that had been a haven for the prophet. He's lived through some experiences that it's like one of those places that become nostalgic for you, that you go back to and you say, wow, man, a lot of memories had here. And being in that house and the early meals and the time and the generosity and the kindness, all that stuff just washing over him. And now he's in this room, maybe the very place where he pronounced the life of this child was going to be born, the miracle that this kid was. And now this miracle is dead on the bed. All that's going on in his mind. And he was hoping, obviously, that by laying his staff on his head, that it would bring the kid back to life, and it didn't. So we read on in verse 34, he went up and lay on the child and put his mouth on his mouth, his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands, and he stretched himself out on the child, and the flesh of the child became warm. So verse 35, he returned and walked back and forth in the house, and again went up and stretched himself on him. And then the child sneezed 7 times. It's like, I don't know why that's even in there, but the child sneezed, achoo, achoo. It's like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. All right. All right, you ready for this? Not in my notes, but I'm going to go with it. True fact that I've shared from here before, I share again. When you sneeze for the first time in a company of people, do you notice how generous they are to you and how kind? Oh, may the Lord of heaven and earth richly and graciously bless your soul for that sneeze that you've put forth into this world. That's the first one. Second one, it's like, okay, bud, blessings. Third one, nothing. After that, it's like we're about to go to blows, isn't it? You ever notice that? Is that just me? It is just me. The first sneeze is the most amazing kindness. The second is like, you better chill out. Third is like, you need a doctor. You got to stop. Just watch. Just do it yourself. You'll see. Anytime. It's amazing. Now, 7 times. Achoo. Sneezing 7 times. And in verse 36, he called Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite woman. So he called her, and when she came into him, he said, pick up your son. So she went in, fell at his feet, and bowed to the ground, and she picked up her son and went out. Man, what a wild carnival ride of a day that was for her to go through all of that. There's so many things in that woman. We could do a whole study on her and just her approach and the way that she handles herself and the things that she does. And I said it last week. I say it again. Notice that she went to the prophet. She brought herself, went to him with her problem, and then followed him through the whole time. She didn't just lay the burden on him. She was there to do whatever she could along the whole journey. It's amazing to watch the way she conducted herself. And what is interesting is that John Corson points out that it wasn't in the authority of the staff, which there was that hope for Elisha, that the authority of the staff would heal this child. But John Corson says it wasn't in the authority of the staff, but it was in the personal contact of the prophet, right? And you think about the ministry of the Lord Jesus, you notice that he spends all night long healing people. You notice that? Now, that is such a slap in the face to the televangelist. I can't think of a better example. If there was ever a time to use the waving of the hand or the suit coat or whatever, mass healing for everyone in the auditorium, that would have been the Lord Jesus. I'm exhausted. I've been up for days. Good night, everyone. Are all healed. But do you notice the Lord never did that? He always individually took the person and he dealt with the individual. The personal contact, the personal touch with that individual. Not the mass healing, not the send it in the mail, I'll pray over it. Personal connection is what did this miracle in. And it was a progressive thing. Now, just a quick look, because we're running out of time. A quick look at the beautiful thing about Elisha. Now, remember Elijah, his mentor, healed a little boy in Zarephath. So there's now a reference point. Before that, there wasn't. But I don't care if your pastor has done it or not. When it's time for you to do it, it's like kind of scary, isn't it? It's like, okay, well, that's what Elijah was feeling like, right? Like that's kind of overwhelming. And notice he's like starts by praying in the room. It's awesome because it's like getting a video footage of what happened for him as a prophet. And it brings up an ultimate point. The old saying is, God's best men are men at best, right? I might say, well, he's just a man. And that's true. But he's just a man that is anointed by God. That's the thing. He is just a man. But he's a man that God has earmarked for this mission in life. And that you can't fake, that you can't pay for, that you can't generate yourself. It just is what it is. But even with all of that being said, the man of God does not always know what to do, or the woman of God does not always know what to do, does she or he? It's like, oh, well, aren't you the spiritual one? Don't you pray all the time? Yeah, I don't know what to do right now. Now is crazy. I don't know. It's weird. So he starts by praying in the room fervently. And then he's like, I'm going to lay on this kid. And he passionately, could not be weirder, but prays over this kid, right? Eye to eye, nose to nose, mouth to mouth. And he prays over this kid. And he notices there's warmth in his body again. And then it says he gets up and he paces around the room and he's like, oh, okay. What do I do? He's praying, Lord, come on, help me. And a second time, he's like, I'm going to do it again. And he prays over this kid. And that kid sneezes 7 times. He's like, whew, wow. Now, what's amazing is all of that happens behind closed doors, right? But notice when he goes and sees the mom, he doesn't hash it all out oh, that was a close one. He's just like, hey, your son's all set. We'll see you later. And he rolls out. How awesome is that? It's so cool. Is it behind closed doors, I'm freaking out. And hey, mom, your son's all set. We'll see you later. Right? That's what my pastor would call, by the way, separating the bitter from the sweet. When you go to serve people, you got to separate the bitter from the sweet. You don't bring your baggage into it. You don't bring the whole story along. You go with them where they are at and you walk on their journey. And my pastor's famous in multiple days in his life where he's done a wedding and or a funeral in the morning only to do the opposite in the afternoon. So he, and particularly the worst is going from a wedding in the morning where everyone's, oh, we lost him, and it's so sad, and it's everyone's brokenhearted, and you're trying to minister and go there with those people, and then literally you got to turn around and walk in another room, woohoo, they're married, and you're like, yeah. He's like, you cannot bring the funeral into the wedding, and you can't bring the wedding into the funeral, right? You have to just let that be where it is and leave it there. You got to separate the bitter from the sweet. So let that help you, friends. If you're ministering to somebody, make sure that you separate the bitter from the sweet. Walk out and say, hey, everything's good. We're rolling. We're out of there. But behind closed doors, you can stamp your feet, cry, and pee in your diaper, whatever you got to do. I don't know. I'm just trying to make something up, make you feel good. Anyway. Okay. Verse 38. Elisha returned to Gilgal, and there was a famine in the land. This is important for the next 2 stories briefly. There's a famine in the land. Now the sons of the prophet were sitting before him, and he said to his servant, put on the large pot and boil stew for the sons of the prophet. And so one went out into the field to gather herbs, and some believe it's like a sea cucumber for whatever it's worth, but it doesn't really matter what it is. He found a wild vine and gathered from it a lapful of wild gourd, and came and sliced them into the pot of stew, and though they did not know what they were. And then in verse 40, they served it to the men that were to eat, and it happened as they were eating the stew that they cried out and said, man of God, there's death in the pot, and they could not eat it. And so Elisha says, then bring some flour, and he put it in the pot and said, now serve it to the people that they may eat. And there was nothing harmful in the pot. Now there's more than miraculous than just putting flour in the pot. But that's the whole idea, that there's a miracle that happens in the revitalization of this pot. But there's more pictures that are beautiful than just the reality of, that's just an awesome story. But again, to Charles Spurgeon's masterful mind, the way he thought of things, he looked at this finding pleasure in the world, and that sometimes we put the poison of the world in our meat pot, and we ruin the whole thing, and where there's death in the pot. And if we're not careful, we will just consume that. William Gurnall, who was someone that inspired Charles Spurgeon, William Gurnall is amazing. He talked about the pleasures of life like milking a cow. And he's like, it's like milking the udders of a cow. And he's like, if you squeeze too hard trying to get the pleasure out of life, you're not going to get any milk at all, right? But to Charles Spurgeon's point, the whole thing is it's the wrong food to live on is what it is. You can't live on that. You can't live on death in the pot. So the next story, verse 42 to 44, we'll read this and make one quick comment. Then a man came from Baal-Sheish and brought the man of God bread, and again, famine time, brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley bread, and newly ripened grain in his knapsack. And he said, give it to the people that they may eat. But the servant said, what shall I set before 100 men? So this is how many prophets we're dealing with. It's pretty cool. And he said, give it to the people that they may eat. For thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left over. So he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over, according to the word of God. So once again, Once again, like everyone's like, how are we going to feed everybody? And he's like, just set it out there and everyone's going to have more than enough. More than enough. What's awesome about the feeding of the 5,000, which we come back to at this point as we're winding down, is that the disciples in the different gospel accounts had different amounts of baskets. In one account, when they fed the multitude, they each had a personal sized basket, if you remember that story, right? And that was a good reminder for all of them that after they had served everybody else, that God had their own portion set out for them. Which is interesting because it said that everyone else that ate was glutted. They ate so much, they're like, oh, I can't even think about eating, right? God gave them all a personal sized basket. It is interesting, and there's a whole study that could be done on the larger baskets. There were 7 larger baskets in another account that they had, and some believe because of the 7 nations that surrounding, they were Gentiles. There's a whole beautiful picture behind all that. But the point is that God always takes care of that, and He multiplies. He multiplies, and let's be Christians that multiply with the Lord, not divide with man. You know what I mean? Like get it amongst ourselves and we divide with each other. We hang with God, we start multiplying, and that's what we want to do.